My topic is the Battle of Ingalls. You know, we have a room full here of aficionados of gunfight, shootouts, gunplay. This was no gunplay, though, at Ingalls. On September 1, 1893, a large posse closed in on Ingalls to capture or overwhelm a notorious outlaw gang in a notorious outlaw town. A furious exchange of gunfire broke out. What followed was not a gunfight. It was not a shootout. The Battle of Ingalls was a gun battle with hundreds of rounds fired. There was a deadly outlaw sniper. 3 deputy marshals were slain. 2 outlaws were hit. 5 bystanders were shot, 2 fatally. 2 horse bystanders also were killed, and a chicken bystander was shot squawking into the air, and then he flopped down into the street, another victim of the gun battle of Ingalls. Oklahoma's first land rush occurred on April 22nd, 1889, onto unassigned lands, they were called, released to settlers in large part through the efforts of Kansas Senator J.J. Ingalls. 6 counties were organized, and most of the 160-acre tracts were quickly claimed by homesteaders. This rural population needed nearby communities for provisions and mail, and small towns began to spring up throughout that region. In eastern Payne County, 2 progressive settlers each donated 40 acres, and these were adjoining parcels of land for a town site to be named after Senator Ingalls. Now, Ingalls was surrounded by fertile prairie lands. The Cimarron River was just to the south, southeast, and other streams also were nearby. The 80 acres was surveyed into a square town site of 16 blocks with 100-foot wide streets and 20-foot wide alleys. The 4 east-west streets were numbered from the north, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. And the 4 north-south streets, beginning from the west, were Maine, Walnut, Ash, and Oak. 2 blacksmith shops were built, along with several stores, houses, livery stables, a barber shop, 2 saloons, a drugstore, a school. About 2 years before this gun battle broke out, there were 40 students enrolled in that school. Every one of the buildings was framed. There were no brick buildings. The only 2-story structure in town was really a story and a half. It was the OK Hotel. It had a big false front, as was the style, but an A-frame roof topped the 2nd floor where most of the beds were. A city water well was dug at Ash, and 2nd, a brothel opened up next door to the OK Hotel. Beer and whiskey flowed plentifully in the 2 saloons. Fistfights were common. In 1892, a drunken Matt McCluskey shot John Anderson to death. The next year, a long-standing feud between Ernest Chevalier and Elijah Samples exploded into gunplay. Samples ended the feud by pumping 3 bullets into Chevalier. These killings established, it was a little old bitty farm town, but the killings established a nefarious atmosphere in Ingalls. Cowboys and young men from nearby farms drank heavily in the town saloons. They engaged in drunken target practice and frequent brawls. Attracted to this wild little community, outlaw leader Bill Doolin and his gang began slipping into town to drink and gamble and visit that brothel. Doolin was a 6-foot 2-inch cowboy in Indian Territory until he became involved in a fatal shootout when he was in his early 30s. He drifted into outlawry with the Dalton Gang. He robbed trains and banks with them, but he missed the gang's massacre while they were trying to rob 2 banks simultaneously. They just got too big for their britches. They were trying to do this to get in the Outlaw Hall of Fame. And the whole thing blew up and everybody got wiped out. Supposedly, he quarreled beforehand with Bob Dalton about how to split the money, and in a tiff, he just didn't go in. Another story had it that maybe his horse went lame on the way into Coffeyville. Anyway, he's still around after the gang gets wiped out, and he organized his own gang, sometimes referred to as the Oklahombres, sometimes referred to as the Wild Bunch. In Ingalls, he fell in love with Edith Ellsworth. She was a clerk in one of the shops. He returned to Ingalls, pressing the courtship until she married him in March of '93. Bill committed a robbery to get enough money to go on a honeymoon. Isn't that romantic? Anyway, Doolin and his men came in and out of Ingalls, drink, gamble, go to that sporting house. And in addition to these recreational pursuits, the outlaws purchased provisions from the store. They went to the barber shop. They traded horses, had their mounts shod, and they sought treatment for illnesses and wounds from the town's 3 doctors. Local citizens welcomed Doolin and his free-spending men. According to one resident, Ingalls became, and I'll quote him, Ingalls was so well known as an outlaw town, his phrase, that even peace officers stayed away from it. Several outlaws were part of Doolin's gang, but preceding the Battle of Ingalls, there were 5 of these guys that accompanied him into town. So there's 6 bad guys in town when the big battle occurs. Bill Dalton, 27, he had not participated in the Dalton gang of his older brothers, but now he was Doolin's second in command. Arkansas Tom Jones was born Roy Daughtery in Missouri. He was now 23. His father was deeply religious. 2 brothers had become preachers, but Roy rebelled and he ran away from his Missouri home. In Oklahoma, he called himself Arkansas Tom Jones, and he hired on at a ranch, but soon he decided to get his money the easy way, and he hooked up with Doolin and his gang. Dan Clifton, known as Dynamite Dick, he switched from rustling to Banks when he joined Doolin. George Bitter Creek Newcomb was another cowboy turned outlaw. He so frequently sang this ditty: I'm a wild wolf from Bitter Creek, and it's my night to howl. Well, he sang it over and over, and they nicknamed him Bitter Creek. He was a member of both the Dalton and Doolin gangs, so he was involved in a variety of train and bank holdups, as well as shootouts with posses. At a country dance, he met 15-year-old Rose Dunn, and he thereby gave her a bit of renown as the Rose of Cimarron. Tulsa Jack Blake, he was a cowboy in Kansas before drifting south into Oklahoma to become a member of Bill Doolin's gang. Doolin and his gang began their frequent visits into Ingalls in July of '93. Indeed, on July 7, a newly appointed Deputy U.S. Marshal Tom Houston and a fellow officer rode into Ingalls and started to dismount when suddenly they were looking into the drawn guns of Bill Doolin, Bill Dalton, Bitter Creek Newcomb, and another outlaw who immediately ran them out of town. But there were rewards offered for the capture of Doolin and his men, and soon deputy marshals and posse men, and as you know, posse men were one rank below deputy marshals. Perhaps they were too young to get a marshal's commission or whatever, but in any event, there was a lot of rewards. You add up each of 6 outlaws or however many are going to be in town on a certain day. Prominent among these officers were Deputy Marshals Tom Houston, Leif Shadley, Dick Speed, and Jim Masterson. Jim was the brother of Bat and Ed. Ed had already been killed in a shootout in Dodge City. A number of posse men wanted to go because of the reward money, but legendary Deputy Marshal Heck Thomas, he immediately declined. He preferred to work alone or with a small picked group because his experience gave him to understand that the more people that knew about it, the more chance there was for a foul up, and that turned out to be true. At the end of August, word came that the outlaws had indeed returned to Ingalls. Lawmen promptly went into action. A wagon set out from Guthrie and another one from Stillwater. Now, Stillwater is only 9 miles away. These 2 were covered wagons, and that was the same as settlers' wagons, which were a common enough sight there in Ingalls. Each wagon carried arms and ammunition and several officers concealed. There was a smaller vehicle, a survey wagon it was called. It already had arrived with 2 men, and the 3 wagons were expecting to rendezvous during that night. However, the Guthrie vehicle didn't arrive till dawn. Early on Friday morning, Arkansas Tom handed 2 boys who were playing marbles outside a stick of gum each. One of them reminisced years later. He said, We called him Chewing Gum Tom because he was always giving us chewing gum. Well, Chewing Gum Tom, better known as Arkansas Tom, was ill, and so he made his way upstairs to his bed in the OK Hotel. Bill Dalton, Doolin, Dynamite Dick, Tulsa Jack had already started an early poker game at the Ransom and Murray Saloon. Bitter Creek Newcomb had taken his horse, a big sorrel named Old Ben, to the blacksmith shop to have a shoe tightened, and he walked back to the saloon. Bitter Creek noticed the covered wagon, and that was the Stillwater wagon. He saw it, the Guthrie wagon, he saw it stop at Pickering's Grove. And that was a campground about a block east next to Dr. Pickering's house. Well, he didn't think anything of it until he noticed another wagon, the Stillwater wagon. And then he saw it following along, the survey wagon. 3 wagons in this little old place. Deciding to investigate, Bitter Creek walked across the street to the blacksmith shop to get his horse. Meanwhile, Deputy Dick Speed had stepped down from the Stillwater wagon. He asked 14-year-old Dale Simmons, who's just a local boy, he said, "Who's that rider?" And the boy pointed, and he said, Why, that's Bitter Creek." Well, Newcomb heard his name. He saw young Simmons point, and instantly he jerked his Winchester from its scabbard. But Speed threw his rifle to his shoulder, and he fired the opening shot in the Battle of Ingalls. Speed's bullet burst the magazine of Bitter Creek's rifle. It sent a piece of metal into his upper right leg just as he was trying to pull the trigger. And so his shot missed. The rifle shots brought Arkansas Tom out of his bed. He seized his rifle, and from the rear upstairs window of the hotel, he drilled Speed in his shoulder. Speed didn't know anybody was up above him. He didn't know where that had come from. And he tried to get back to his wagon, but a second round from Arkansas Tom dropped him with a bullet in the chest. He went down spitting blood, and he died within moments. Bitter Creek spurred his horse south, struggling to stay in the saddle as officers opened fire at him. From Ransom and Murray's Saloon, Doolin-Dalton, Dynamite Dick, and Tulsa Jack gave him covering fire. Bitter Creek cleared the town going south. Encountering a family who were heading in their wagon into town, he shouted, "Tell my pals, I can do them no good. I'm bad hurt." And he just kept on. Young Dale Simmons ran across the street to Vaughn's Saloon. He then emerged out the back door, and when he did that, he was in full view of Arkansas Tom at that hotel window. Assuming he was a marshal, Arkansas Tom brought him down with one shot, and the 14-year-old would die about 6 o'clock that afternoon. With Bitter Creek's escape, the officers turned their fire on Ransom and Murray's Saloon. A horse at the hitch post. That horse was blocking the doorway, and they intended to shoot inside. So one of the marshals just gunned down that horse. With bullets flying into the saloon now, patron N.A. Walker bolted outside only to be shot in the liver by one of the lawmen. Outside, citizens scampered for cover, many of them crowding into a cave on the south edge of town. Officers swept down to Ransom and Murray's Saloon and shouted in, "You are surrounded! Surrender!" Doolin defiantly shouted back, "Go to hell!" Lawmen poured a barrage into the saloon. They later counted 172 bullet holes in the planking. The outlaws had no choice but to bolt for their horses at the stable next door. A half-finished shed provided cover. Doolin went first, and he was followed then by Dalton, Dynamite Dick, and Tulsa Jack. Saloon keeper Neil Murray, intending to create a diversion, foolishly, he stepped to the door of the saloon with a rifle in his hand. Well, 3 officers were zeroed in on that, and 2 bullets struck his torso, and another one broke his arm, and he pitched into the street. Deputy Tom Houston scrambled to a new position to cover the rear of the stable. Houston was out of view of sharpshooting Arkansas Tom Jones. But Jones, what he did, he got, remember, A-frame roof. All he's got is front window and the back window, and this guy's off to the side. So he pulls a chair over, climbs up, and knocks a hole in the shingles, and then he's able to lean up and aim downward. Houston is unsuspecting. Arkansas Tom shot him in the left side and in the bowels. Jim Masterson blazed away at the stable until his ammunition was exhausted. Then he dashed back to Pickering's Grove for more ammo. At that point, the four outlaws burst out of the stable. Dalton and Tulsa Jack from the front door, and Doolin and Dynamite Dick from the rear. The officers opened fire. Bill Dalton's horse was shot in the jaw. Well, of course, the wounded animal became unmanageable. But Dalton somehow got him under control and spurred away. He thought he was going to be all right, but Deputy Leif Shadley shot the poor beast in the leg. Shadley thought he also had shot Dalton, but under fire, Bill, who wasn't hit, he pulled the gang's only pair of wire cutters from his saddlebags. Then he clambered up behind Doolin. Suddenly, Shadley went down, struck by a rifle bullet that pierced his hip and then ranged downward. It was long thought that Dalton shot Deputy Shadley, but fuller investigation has indicated that Arkansas Tom recorded his third fatal hit on one of the officers, not to speak of killing young Dale Salmons. Meanwhile, Dalton cut a fence with his wire clippers. He enabled the gang to ride into a ravine. When they emerged, galloping away from town, the officers opened up again. And sure enough, Dynamite Dick was knocked out of the saddle by a neck wound. But he was assisted back into the saddle and the gang escaped. Another boy, bystander Frank Briggs, he was wounded slightly in the shoulder. Now, soon, the posse realized, the citizens realized that gunfire was coming from the second floor of the hotel. The posse surrounded the building, and soon reinforcements arrived from Stillwater. They had sent a messenger over just as soon as all the gunfire started. And so Dr. Pickering goes upstairs to speak with Arkansas Tom. Well, Arkansas Tom was afraid he was going to be lynched. He had plenty of ammunition, and sporadically he opened fire again. But the doctor came down and reported to everybody. He says, "Where is the boys?" That, of course, was his fellow outlaws. "I told him they'd gone." He said he did not think they would leave him. It hurt him bad. "I never seen a man wilt so in my life." A little after 2 in the afternoon, he surrendered to a preacher. The deceased Dick Speed, along with the mortally wounded Tom Houston and Leif Shadley, they were taken in one of the covered wagons to Stillwater. Speed's funeral was the next day, Saturday, at the Methodist Church in Stillwater. He was 26, and he left a wife and 3 children. Tom Houston, a widower, he died that same day. He was a former city marshal of Stillwater, so the next day, which is Sunday, 1,500 people attended his funeral at the Methodist Church. Also on Sunday, Leif Shadley died. So what they did was ship him by rail to Kansas, where he had family. Doolin, Dalton, Tulsa Jack, and the wounded Bitter Creek and Dynamite Dick all escaped. Amazingly, they hid out in the vicinity until Bitter Creek was tended by a doctor, and the doc was from another town, and he got him where he could ride. Within a relatively short time, Doolin and his followers brazenly began to slip back into Ingalls again for R&R, and then the robberies began again. But $5,000 by now had been posted for Bill Doolin, not to speak of another gang member, of the other gang members. Arkansas Tom Jones was sentenced to 50 years in the penitentiary for his 4 killings. And the presiding judge, notified U.S. Marshal E.D. Nix, "Marshal, I have reached the conclusion that the only good outlaw is a dead one. It will simplify your problems and probably save lives in the future if you will instruct your deputies to just bring them in dead." At first, The first one to be brought in dead was Bill Dalton. Dalton split with Doolin, apparently over a cut of robbery proceeds. Dalton hid out with his wife and 2 children on the farm of Houston Wallace, northwest of Ardmore. In May 1895, the new Dalton gang, Bill and 3 sorry criminals, 2 of them were brothers. They all had an IQ of about 15 added up together, you know. They robbed a bank in Longview, Texas, right downtown. And Longview's just 35 miles from me. Through the years, I can't count how many programs I've given about that bank robbery. One outlaw, I mean, they shot the place up. They shot 6 citizens, and among the fatally wounded was the town marshal. The outlaws suffered 1 casualty, 1 guy, the guy who did most of the shooting, he was killed. And the other 3 galloped out of town. Well, now the citizens are frustrated. Dadgummit, you know, and the only one they could get out was that dead outlaw lying right there. So they grabbed his body, put a noose around his neck, and hung him from a telegraph pole. With good detective work, lawmen tracked Dalton to his hideout at the Wallace farm, but just 2 weeks after the bank holdup, a large posse closed in on that farm. Bill, who was babysitting while his wife went with Houston Wallace to Ardmore shop, he was shot dead. He tried to get out of there and shoot his way out, and they killed him right in front of his children. They dumped him into a wagon, take him into town. It was a hot day, and his body began to swell. Twice they stopped at farms to get a bucket of well water and pour over him. Didn't do any good. You ought to see the photos. At the outskirts of Ardmore, Mrs. Dalton was coming by wagon out of town when these guys came into town, and that's how she found out she was a widow. Following a train robbery in April 1895, Bitter Creek Newcomb, Tulsa Jack Blake, Little Bill Radler, Red Buck Waitman, and Charlie Pierce, they were subject to a hot pursuit by posse men. Tulsa Jack was killed by a Winchester bullet. Little Bill Radler's hand was mangled by a slug, and 1 finger was just dangling. He pulled a pocket knife out and cut the finger off and tossed it away. And the pursuit went on, but they caught up with him, and they shot him again, and now he's captured. At the end of the month, Bitter Creek and Charlie Pierce came to the Dunn Ranch, remember, Rose, to pick up several $100s they had stashed there, but the Dunn brothers, John and Dale, shot them, took the bodies to Guthrie in a wagon for the reward money. Red Buck George Waitman was flushed by a posse from a hideout near Arapahoe, Oklahoma in May of '96, ordered to surrender. He tried to shoot his way out, and the posse cut him down. Later that year, the elusive Bill Doolin. Now, after the big gun battle, he had been tracked down and arrested by Bill Tillman. However, he was jailed in Guthrie and managed to escape, and he fled west and hid out for a while in lonely New Mexico, and he thought, hey, maybe I can get my family out here, live a normal life. In August '96, he returned to the farm of his father-in-law, who was a minister at this point in Lawson, Oklahoma. His intention was to bring his wife and little boy out to New Mexico, but Deputy Marshal Heck Thomas, suspecting that Doolin would try to unite with his wife and kid, he promised part of the reward money to 2 brothers who lived near the Ellsworth house. These informants saw Doolin slip into his father-in-law's home on August 23rd, and later they saw Edith and her father load a plow, household goods, and personal effects into a wagon. Deputy Marshal Thomas made a hard ride to Lawson. He stationed a posse at a cane patch where there was a little road that went right through the middle. About midnight, Edith took the reins of the wagon, intending to meet Doolin on the other side of the creek. Carrying a Winchester, Bill walked down the lane where Edith thought she had seen some boys fooling around a while ago. What they were was the posse members. Suddenly, Heck Thomas shouted for him to surrender. Doolin whipped up his Winchester and triggered a couple of shots. Deputy Thomas had lowered his Winchester to a posse member, had loaned it to him, but Heck still had his shotgun. He brought that shotgun up and triggered it, and kaboom, the fight was ended. I know many of you have seen that classic photo of Bill Doolin, old tall Bill Doolin. He is propped up in a chair, and they've taken his shirt off, and if you get a magnifying glass, you can count 21 buckshot holes. I know, I've done it a number of times. Now, a rough element continued to carouse in Ingalls, and drinking, brawling, random shooting persisted. In 1895, the Stillwater Gazette reported if a stranger had happened into Ingalls Saturday, he would have thought he was in Dodge City or some other frontier town in the early days. The drunkenness, hollering, screaming, cursing, running horses, and blackguarding was a disgrace and scandal to the community. The Gazette later asked in obvious exasperation, how does it come that dozens of men and boys who go to Ingalls sober return home with a jag on? There were several shootings in 94 and 95. The town's lurid reputation prompted travelers to just avoid Ingalls, and when the railroads decided to come that way, they bypassed Ingalls. And then one of the toughest frontier towns of the 1890s began a permanent decline. I know a number of you have been there. When I first saw Ingalls years ago, the population was 24. But even as Ingalls suffered a long demise, there's one other guy, one other murderous outlaw that we hadn't dealt with, Roy Daughtery, alias Arkansas Tom Jones. He had, remember, been sentenced to 50 years. He got a parole in 1910, about 15 years. He ran a restaurant for a couple of years. He went to Hollywood to act in Western movies. And in 1917, he reverted to his criminal ways and he robbed a bank and again was imprisoned. He came out 4 years later, 1921. He was released. After 2 years, he became involved in another bank holdup in Missouri. Again, he was a wanted man. In 1924, the next year, he had taken refuge in the Joplin home of a friend on August 16th. Detectives found him there, babysitting for his friends. When Arkansas Tom caught sight of the officers, he snatched up a pistol, opened fire. After 2 rounds, his gun jammed, and one of the officers drilled Arkansas Tom just above the heart. Well, thank you very kindly. Appreciate your attention.
Graveyards filled with tombstones, waiting for the name. Man can use his back or use his brains. Some just went so crazy long. There's nothing ever changed till Bill Doolin met Bill Dalton. He was working cheap. He just bought